Almost 31 now. I'm towards the end of my career, so I'm looking forward to retiring here real soon. Got about 3.5 more years to go, and then I'll be retired. I grew up here in town. I had no formal education. I went to Harrison High School, so I don't have a college degree. Being a police officer now.
Hey, well, wait a minute. I went to Harrison. I got a college degree.
Well, I know, because, but I have no formal education. I went to a little bit of college. I was actually going to try to get my degree as a homicide detective. And guess how many hours a week I work? What do you think? 60's average. I work usually Monday through Friday, 6 a.m. I was at 5:30 this morning until 6 o'clock at night. So I work on an average 60 hours a week. I found out trying to go to school and be a homicide detective was like impossible. The couple classes I did take up here, I was always getting called out. I was always missing assignments. I was getting poor grades, and my work came first before my education. So I was missing a lot of time with my family as well because I had children at the time. They're all grown now. Thank God. They're all in the house. And one of them is actually in the CSPD Academy as we speak right now. He just got hired this year. So it's something he wanted to do. He went to UCCS to get his degree, and now he's going to be a police officer in the city of Colorado Springs. So I'm very proud of him. But this is a very demanding job. Talked a little bit about Lieutenant Joe Kinda before I forget. Mr. Kinda, he was my boss. He was my lieutenant when I came to the homicide unit 21 years ago. He was the guy that actually took a chance on me. I was a patrol officer working Sand Creek Midnights. That's the area of town I grew up in, Pikes Peak Park, same area of town Mr. Radabon grew up in as well. So he took a chance on me, took me straight from patrol to homicide. And I felt really blessed that I got that opportunity to do that. I planned on staying there for a couple of years. I was going to be a canine officer, and then I fell in love with being a homicide detective. And I'm going to try to do that for another year, and then I'm going to try to transition from the homicide unit to the training academy. And the reason I want to do that is because when I retire, I don't have to come to court all the time. So I don't want those subpoenas to follow me in my retirement years because I spend a lot of time in court testifying in our homicide cases. So talking a little bit about what we do and how we investigate homicides, just so you get a basic understanding about how the Colorado Springs Police Department investigates homicides. If for some reason today we had a homicide that occurred, we work as a team. So there's no real I in team. It's not all about what I can do. It's about what the team can do. So we have two different homicide teams. So we're on call basically Monday at 8 a.m. till the following Monday at 8 a.m. So every other week I'm on call. That's a huge impact to your family, to your spouse and everything else. So it's a very demanding job. Most people that come into the homicide unit I try to be very nice to because later on they become what? My boss, my supervisor. They promote. A lot of guys in my unit have promoted now. And now I have one that is actually my commander that's over the homicide unit that I trained as a homicide detective about 10 years ago. So people come into that unit, people that have spent some time in that unit, usually promote upwards. The reason why I couldn't promote is I had no formal education. And not that I ever wanted to because I absolutely love my job every day. I come to work, I love what I do. So if we had a homicide tonight, the team would go out. There's usually 4 people on each one of those teams. And that's made up of a witness detective. That's a detective that's assigned to interview witnesses. There's a detective that's involved in interviewing the suspect. There's a detective that's involved in doing the crime scene, working with a civilian crime scene investigator. So our department's large enough, we actually have a crime scene investigator that's a civilian employee that works with our city detectives. My least favorite role, one of them, because it's wintertime now, it's cold outside, and all of our homicides happen in the wintertime or outdoors. I hate cold weather. I will not be spending any more winters here after I retire. I love summers here, but no, I don't like winter anymore. And then the last one is the, I talked about witness scene suspect, and then the victim detective. That's probably the hardest role as a homicide detective, is being that victim detective. And why do you think that role would be the toughest for us? Well, they can't talk. What else do we have to deal with when I talk about the victims? The family. That is the worst part of our job, is what we see family members going through. We know that we're all going to lose a family member. We're going to lose grandpa and grandma due to a natural death, through cancer, or whatever the situation may be. We know that that's going to occur. But to lose a family member to a violent crime is extremely difficult. To an automobile accident, some sudden death like that. Those are really tough things. And talking about how emotional those kind of notifications can be, and how struggling it can be for a homicide detective to investigate something like that, is to go out and do a death notification. I did one a few years ago to actually 2 parents. It was mom and dad. This has probably been about 15 years ago that I did this notification. is I go to somebody's house dressed like this at 6 o'clock in the morning, and I'm explaining to them that their daughter's the victim of a homicide. Well, what do you think mom does when she learns her daughter's been killed? She loses it. She just freaks out, as we all probably would. And she starts to cry, and she's starting to talk about what is she going to do now? What's her grandchildren going to do without their mother? Well, guess what else I got to tell her? Her grandchildren were also murdered tonight as well. The guy killed his entire family and then took his own life. So doing those kind of notifications are extremely difficult. I still remember that like it was yesterday. It was probably 15 years ago now that I did that notification. So those are really, really hard. They're emotionally draining on us, but we have to make those notifications all the time. I just did one a couple of weeks ago, and it's something you never, ever forget. I see a lot of people that are deceased. I've been out on over 1,000 suicides in my course of my career upstairs in the major crimes unit. But I always remember those death notifications. Those things stick with me. My favorite role is interviewing suspects. So that's what I'm here to talk to you today about, is interviewing homicide suspects. And it's a very enjoyable job. I get to do a lot of different things when I talk to a homicide suspect. And I want this class to be interactive because you may not know what I do in those interview rooms. So if you're curious about something, if you're curious about how law enforcement conducts something or whatever, raise your hand. I'm very open. I believe in sharing information because that's how we learn and educate people. What I do is completely different than TV. We see the Homicide Hunter TV show. Those are actual true cases. I actually worked some of those cases, and I was involved in some of those cases back when Lieutenant Kendall was in charge of the homicide unit. But we see shows like CSI, programs like that. Does that have an impact negatively on law enforcement when we go to court? Big time. We spend hours and hours and hours talking to the jury about how hard it is to overcome that CSI effect, is what we call it, is because a lot of people believe that we can actually get done in 1 hour what happens on TV. I mean, how long does a homicide take to investigate? Anybody have any idea?
Months.
Sometimes they happen days, sometimes months, sometimes years. I have a case that I'm working on that I started back in 1995 when I came into the homicide unit back in July of 95 when I became a homicide detective, that I'm still working on. So there's always cases, there's no statute of limitations to those cases. So we're always investigating those cases, and we do a lot of reports. Who in here likes to write reports? Who likes to write that essay for the teacher? Not very good. No hands go up.
Mine did.
Yeah. Most people don't. What do I do all day long as a homicide detective? Write reports. Now, I'm really lucky because I get to actually dictate. I get to talk into a tape recorder. That's a real big thing for me because I can't spell, because I don't have a high school diploma. But I can use these really big words that are really cool, and I get to talk into a tape recorder. Somebody else types it for me, and then I get those reports back. I get to proofread them, and then I get to submit them as our police reports. That's what I was doing this morning when I came in at 5:30, as I was listening to an interview I conducted with somebody, and then I was dictating into a tape recorder. Somebody else is going to type that later on for me when I record it, so that they can actually type that information. So when we go on a homicide, and for instance, if we had one not too long ago, where the boss calls me and says, hey, it goes out on a homicide, we've got one person deceased, we've got multiple witnesses, and we have a suspect down at the police operations center. A lot of the times when I get called out in the middle of the night, it's never at 8 o'clock in the morning after I've rested all night. Usually when do I get called out? 1, 2, those are A-okay. It's the 11 o'clock, 10 o'clock call-ins I absolutely hate because I've only been asleep for about an hour. So it's like, if I only have 1 hour sleep, then I don't function very well. How long are we usually out on a homicide from the get-go until we get to go home and go back to bed? Anywhere between 24 and 48 hours. It just depends. Has anybody ever stayed up for 72 straight hours with no sleep? How do you feel? Lousy, man. It's almost like being drunk. I mean, it truly is. You feel really crappy. You're fatigued. You're tired. You're not thinking clearly. You try, and when we go into those rooms to do those interviews with suspects, we have to be really good active listeners. That's a really big thing for me, is to be able to be an active listener and listen to what people are telling me. So when I'm really tired, imagine going to a party tonight, getting hammered. Are you going to really remember everything somebody told you? You're intoxicated? Probably not. And it's going to be my job. I have to not only remember what they're saying to me during that interview, but I also have to be able to use that information as that interview goes from an interview to an interrogation. And sometimes there's a natural transition, and sometimes there's not. A lot of times when I go in the room and I'm starting to talk to a suspect, the first thing I got to do is to do what? When I have somebody in custody at the police station, what do I have to give them?
The right.
Miranda. Is Miranda a really difficult thing to get through? I mean, what I mean by that is, if I came into a room and I was interviewing a suspect and I got to give them their Miranda rights, they're in custody and I'm going to question them. So I always use that rule, what I call 1 + 1 = 2. And that 2 is, I got to give them their Miranda rights. So when I give them their Miranda rights, do most people waive their rights? Who thinks most people waive their Miranda rights when I bring them in? Who thinks that they don't? And who really is not going to raise their hand? There's a few of you as well. So most people, believe it or not, waive their Miranda rights. Why do you guys think people waive their Miranda rights?
Indicate that they didn't tell a lie.
Correct. You're absolutely right. They are smarter than we are. And I sometimes come in and I pretend like I'm not very bright. You know, they think they're smarter than we are. You know, they think that they're going to go ahead and give that lie. How many of us, I mean, I had children, and my poor children, you know, I used a lot of my techniques on them when I interviewed them and talked to them about some of the things that they've done wrong. But one of the things that, when you go and you start talking about Miranda, and the reason why I honestly truly believe, and this is just my own personal opinion, I haven't read it in a textbook or anything like that, is people believe truly they are smarter than us. And they think that they're going to be able to lie. Is it easy to lie?
No.
Who thinks it's easy to lie? How many people have ever been caught in a lie? Why have you been caught in a lie? Why have you been caught in a lie?
Not very good at it.
Not very good at it?
Expressions that we do that, for example, my mom might know that I look to the side when I lie.
My wife looks at me every night and she goes, "You're lying to me." She goes, "I'm not going to tell you how I know you're lying to me, but you're lying to me about something." And she knows, and I am lying to her, you know. There's apparently something I must do with my facial expression. I don't know. But are we able to pick up on that very quickly during the interview? Sometimes we're not, because I've never met anybody in this room. Nobody in this room looks familiar to me. So if you start talking to me, I don't know if you're lying to me or not. But a lot of times people will come out with really detailed lies. And so when I go into that room, I ask them a lot of information. First I give them Miranda. The majority of people, even in homicide cases, waive their Miranda rights. Once they waive their Miranda rights, it's sort of game on for me. I'm like, great, I got them through the hard part. And it's really not that hard of a part, but a lot of detectives, when I train and I talk to them, Miranda's not a big deal. You got to give it to them. You can't downplay it. You go into the room, say, like I did just the other night on a case, look, you're clearly in police custody. You're not free to leave. I want to ask you some questions. You're going to have an opportunity to ask me some questions, but before we do that, I have to give you your Miranda rights. I don't claim to know Miranda verbatim off the top of my head from memory. I use a form. I do it the same way every single time, because what are they going to attack later on in court? How I used it, how I gave Miranda and all that kind of stuff. So I do it the exact same time. I've never gone to a motion hearing where I've gotten attacked over giving Miranda or anything like that. I've seen cops try to do some really wild, crazy things and be tricky about it, but you don't need to be, because the majority of people will talk to you. But once after they talk and they get through Miranda, and prior to Miranda, there's a lot of things that I talk about is rapport building. How do I build rapport with somebody? How would I build rapport with somebody in the room? How would I make you do that? Depends on the person. Would it be easy for me to go in to talking to some guy like the Bears, you know, and just talking about sports and those kind of things? I mean, who watched the Broncos win the other day and that big field goal and all that kind of stuff? Would I build any rapport with somebody that's from New Orleans and he's got all the Saints stuff on, talking about how great the Broncos are? It might shut him down a little bit, but if he had Saints stuff on, I'm like, that's bullshit. What the Denver did the other day, that was illegal. They shouldn't have been able to do that or anything else. So there's a lot of things that I can do to build rapport with somebody and just have that connection. I used to always laugh years ago. We used to get double time on Sundays. So I built rapport with my suspects, especially on Sundays, is we would watch football together and have food together before we went in the interview room. I'm not asking them any questions or anything like that because I'm out there building rapport with them. Now, is that legal? Absolutely. If I'm not asking you any questions, we can talk about anything other than the case. So I can talk to you about, you know, if I found out you went to Harrison High School or you grew up in Colorado Springs, we could talk about all kinds of things. So when I'm getting background information prior to Miranda, I'm trying to build some of a rapport with the suspect. Do I have a long time to do that? No, I don't. And that's that's the hardest thing to try to teach cops is rapport building. You know, some cops either have that gift of gab and be able to talk, and then there's some that just, you can't teach them that. They just are really just focused and they don't really say a whole lot. And they're just sort of that, you know, one-track kind of individual. So rapport building is very important. So once they're through Miranda, the next thing I ask them about is, tell me a little bit about what happened. It depends on the case. A lot of times in a homicide case, I'll ask him, what were you doing before the homicide happened? And you know, when I come in and I talk to somebody, do I tell them that you're in custody for killing 2 people tonight? You know, dude, you shot, killed 2 people tonight, let's talk about it. Do I say that?
No.
No. What I do is I downplay and I minimize everything that I do. So when I walk into the room and I'm talking to a suspect, I'm like, hey, I want to talk to you about what happened tonight. Do I need to tell them why they're in custody? What they're being charged with? Do I have to tell them that? I do not need to tell them that. A lot of people believe that if you're under arrest, I got to tell you why you're under arrest. All I say is that you're currently in custody for something that happened tonight. I don't say you're in custody for killing somebody. You're in custody for a brutal rape and murder that happened, those kind of things. We don't do that. All I do is walk in and I minimize it and say, you're clearly in custody for what happened tonight, and I want to talk to you about what occurred. And so once I get them through Miranda and they're talking to me, I ask them about what they were doing before. Why would I ask them about what they were doing before the homicide? Why don't I just jump right to the homicide?
So you can see that like my intuition will line up and kind of back and
So she says it's just to see if the story would line up and stuff like that. And that's correct. So what I try to do a lot of times is I ask them, tell me about your evening. So I'll use a case I had back in 1997 where a little boy was shot and killed here in town. He was 13 years old. So I get the suspect in the room and I'm talking to him about, tell me about what you were doing before that happened. Well, before, you know, the events that occurred this evening. And what's his tendency to do? He's my bad guy. He's obviously involved. He's going to lie to me. I know he's going to lie to me. So a lot of times when you are going to lie to your girlfriend, your spouse, your boyfriend, whoever you're going to lie to, you think the story through, what you're going to tell them, because you want to make sure that, you know, you're not going to get caught in that lie. And that's what the suspect is trying to do, is he doesn't want to get caught in that lie. So when I bring this particular individual in, I'm asking him, so tell me about what you did this evening. Well, I was in Colorado Springs, and then about 6 o'clock this evening, me and my buddy, we got in a car and we started to drive out of town. We were going to go down to Walsenburg for the weekend, so I wasn't even in Colorado Springs when it happened. Do I leave it at that? No, I don't leave it at that. So what I try to do is, with this individual is I like, so you're in Colorado Springs, 6 o'clock this evening, you're driving down to Pueblo, or driving down to Walsenburg, Colorado, which is south of Pueblo. Do you stop anywhere? Well, yeah, we stopped. Where'd you stop at? Because he hasn't thought about these kind of questions. He's thinking that I'm just going to go, I'm in Walsenburg, and that's going to be good, and that's going to be the whole interview, and we're done. But he doesn't think I'm going to go a little bit further with that. So what I ask him is like, where'd you stop at? Well, I stopped at 7-Eleven. Which 7-Eleven did you stop at? What am I going to do with that information later on? Corroborate it. I'm going to be able to follow that information up. So he stopped at 7-Eleven. He tells me he stopped at a 7-Eleven, which I knew had been torn down 2 months previous because I drove down that area all the time because I had family down there. So I knew the 7-Eleven didn't even exist. I already knew he was lying to me. Do I call him on this lie at that point? Ew, I just wanted to put a rope around his neck and continue to just give me those lies and just continue to hang himself. And that's what he's doing in the room. So when you went into 7-Eleven, how'd you pay? Did you pay with cash or credit card? If you paid with a credit card, what can I do later on? I can trace it, I can follow it up, right? What did the clerk like? What did the clerk look like? Was it a male or a female? Was it a female? How old? He hasn't thought these detailed things through. If you ask a truthful person that, how would they respond? Very quickly, boom, 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 boom. But when I'm now asking him questions he's not anticipating, he's going to start pausing. He's going to start going. He's going to use what we call a stall technique, and it could be a gamut of things. I've seen people just sit there and pause and think and go, well, I think it was a female. Well, you would know if it was a female who waited on you. Were they white, black, or Hispanic? How old were they? How tall were they? How much did they weigh? I'm firing these questions at him because I want to see how quickly he can respond to see whether or not I'm going to be able to track him later on in information. And then they go through and they give you those information all the way up to the homicide. And then when you start talking to them about the event, typically what I hear is, this shit happened. Oh, okay. And then they just continue to gloss over the actual event and then just keep talking about what happened afterwards. Why would I want to talk to somebody what I believe they did after the homicide? Why would that be important to me? What could I do with that information in a police investigation? I can check it, I can verify it. So a lot of times people say, well, you know, then some stuff happened, and then I went to so-and-so's house, and I went here, and I went there, and I went this place, and all these other places. If you left the scene of a homicide, and you used a gun, for example, you said right after the homicide, you went over to Mary's house, and I know that I have probable cause to charge you with a homicide, what else may I have probable cause to do? I can get a search warrant, I can go into that particular house and look for physical evidence. So it's really important to ask people what they did before and after, just to see how detailed they are. And then now we got to get back to the actual where stuff happened, and they just sort of glossed over that information. Sometimes cases are more difficult than others to get people to confess. Does everybody confess to homicides? Suspects? No, they don't. Most of the time people would admit little tiny nuggets, but sometimes people will just come in and give it all up, and then most of the time they don't. A lot of times there's a lot of work involved. How long does a typical interview with an interrogation last with a homicide suspect? 4 hours is usually actually a very good average. I've done as many as 10 hours, I think is the longest. And has anybody ever been in a room with somebody for 10 hours and tried to have a dialogue back and forth? Going like that. It's hard to do, it really is. And especially now I've been up for 36 hours and I'm trying to do that. It makes it even harder because I'm tired and I'm fatigued and stuff like that. So when we're in that room, it lasts anywhere from usually 2 to 4 hours is a good average. I wish they only lasted a half an hour. Why is that? What does that make easy for me? That thing called a report. Absolutely. You know, a lot of detectives, I always thought, man, your report was really easy tonight because your guy always lawyers up on you. I actually think sometimes they use that as a technique because it makes their reports a lot easier. So I always accuse some of my co-workers, your goal is to get them to talk, not to lawyer up. I know when they lawyer up, your report's really easy. I did an interview a couple days ago where, you know, I was like, oh, and I had to watch the interview and it lasted like 2.5 hours. I'm like, God, if you had just lawyered up, I'd have been done like a day ago with this report, and now I'm still watching this videotaped interview. So sometimes, you know, it creates a lot of work, but my goal is to get somebody to talk. So they do last about 2 to 4 hours, and sometimes they last a little bit longer. But then I have to decide, it's sort of like being a quarterback, is the way I look at it, is I have to decide how I want this interview to go and how I'm going to get him to basically take baby steps and confess. Is it easier to interview in that room with one detective or two detectives? If there's one bad guy, should you have one detective or two detectives in that room? And you've seen it on TV where there's sometimes one, sometimes two. Which is better? Who says one? Why do you say one? Okay. Why else one? Who else? Somebody raise your hand.
Yeah, well, I guess, like, if we need a conversation with one person.
Then two? Okay. Who said two? Why two?
Yes, review intimidation now is probably the best thing. That might make somebody less likely to lie if there's two detectives or whatever.
Who else thinks two? Why two?
I'd say easier to keep track of the information.
Okay. And no one or two is absolutely the right way. I teach and I train one, and I'll tell you the reason why. And I use this as an example. I have a really good friend that's a sergeant that was a robbery detective years ago. And we have the same type of personality. We want to be in charge when we're in that room. We put two people in the room that want to be in charge of the interview. You got one bad guy there. Who's actually in charge? You or the other guy? You or the other detective? Neither, because you're doing this the whole interview. In fact, we had a case, and this is a case from downtown, where a female was shot. It looked like she was going to die. It was a robbery, so he's a robbery detective, and I'm a homicide detective, so it looks like she's going to die. We always have this bantering back and forth, man, this is homicide, robbery, sir, you know, you're just robbery, you know. And I tell him before we even walked in the room, do not talk. Just sit there and listen to me, okay? I'm going to do all the talking. How long did that last? About 30 seconds, I think, and I'm like, looking at him like, what are you doing to me? Why are you talking? I told you not to talk. Because I have a train of thought of how I want this interview to go. And what's he doing is he's interrupting me. He's taking it in a path I don't want to go. He's saying things I wouldn't be saying yet. He's wanting to be more confrontational. That's just his personality. I'm not very confrontational until I have to be. And I can be when the time comes. But he's starting off way too early for me. So, again, our personalities are a little bit different, and so it makes it a lot more difficult to do. So this guy, I'm interviewing, he waives his rights. He'd been out of prison not very long, so I thought he would have taken a class in Department of Corrections. 101, never talk to law enforcement after you get back out again. But he's involved in this robbery, and he starts talking. And I asked him, were you ever downtown? Never downtown. Never, ever, ever downtown. How can I get him from he was never downtown to him being downtown in Colorado Springs? What things can I say to him to get him there? And so these are some of the things we talk about, being able to bait people. Anybody got kids? And you know, anybody that has a child, it's easy to bait your kids with different techniques that you can get them to talk. So it's the same thing in real life when I'm talking to a suspect. He claims he was never downtown, so I'm going to bait him. And I'm thinking, what can I do to make him believe that I think he's downtown? And this is early on in the case. It's only about 4 or 5 hours in. So I say to him, what kind of businesses are downtown? What would you say? What kind of businesses are downtown Colorado Springs? Bars, what else?
Restaurants.
Courthouse, what other kind of big businesses are down there? Banks, right? Oh, so he says banks. I'm thinking, well, there you go. There's banks. What do banks have? They have money, but what else do they have?
Cameras.
Security cameras. So all I got to do with this guy is bait him. So I said, so there's security cameras. Let me tell you about what's going on right now while I'm talking to you. While I'm talking to you, there's at least 4 or 5 other detectives downtown right now going to all those banks you just talked about, and we're pulling surveillance video from U.S. Bank, Compass Bank. We're pulling all the video downtown right now. I haven't looked at it. They probably haven't even looked at it yet. But what's it going to show? So what's he thinking now? Holy shit, yeah, he's thinking, oh crap, well, what am I going to say now? I said I was never downtown, so now I've got him, I flipped him. So he's going to say to me, well, all right, well maybe I was downtown. So we went from I was never downtown to now I'm downtown. So now I'm baby stepping, walking him through this information. So as I go through the interview, I got him from I was never downtown to I'm in the general area, and then I continue to walk him through to get him to talk to me and confess to that shooting. Can I lie?
Yes.
Is it all right to lie as a detective?
Yes.
I can. What happens if I get caught lying? You're my bad guy, and you know that I'm just giving you a bunch of BS and I'm lying to you about facts that you know are not true. What's that? The report's out the window. What else? My credibility's out the window. What else? Absolutely. He knows I'm just full of BS. He knows that I'm not. You're absolutely right. He thinks that he's got the upper hand. And he does, because I have gone out and I've lied about stuff. But we use a lot of things to bait people, to get them to basically talk to us about. Like for instance, all the traffic cameras. You see them at the intersections, right? That camera up there. Those are recorded 24/7, are they not?
I don't know.
Huh?
I'm not sure.
Who says they're recorded? Who says they're really not sure? A lot of people aren't sure, right? But again, I have to look at how intelligent somebody is, what their level of education may be. If I've got somebody that I don't think is very well educated or whatever, I might use that as a technique. They're not recorded, wish they were. But I've used that before going, hey, what did you think that camera showed? Well, probably showed me walking across the street about that time. There you go. I was never there, and now I'm walking across the street. So those are baby steps to show you're going in the right direction. If I get caught lying, and I actually went to a training class years ago where the instructor was talking about, hey, you know what you need to do is use a blank VHS tape, set it on the table, and say surveillance video. That's before surveillance videos were really that big. But just set it there and see what he does. So one of our detectives actually tried that. I didn't like the idea because I didn't want to get caught lying. And so about halfway through the interview, he's like, I got you on tape right here. They're committing that crime. What do you think the bad guy says? Prove it. He calls him out on it and says, show it to me. Oh, well, now what do I do? It's actually blank. And so, what do you do with that information? Versus, and I actually had a case a couple years ago where there was a shooting at Memorial Park where somebody broke out their iPhone and recorded the whole thing. Watched it all happen. I had it all on video. And I was training one of the new detectives, and he's like, let me just play the video to the bad guy. I'm like, oh, no, that's way too easy. Let's try to get him to talk about it. But it finally got to the point, it's like, hey, we got it on video. The guy's going, yes, you do not. Let me push play for you. Boom. Is that not you right there carrying a gun, walking up, shooting that dude? Yeah, that's me. Okay. I mean, that's how easy it was, but I wanted to work a little bit to try to get that confession from the guy without the video. But sometimes if you've got the evidence, you've got what you need to get somebody to talk about it, don't be afraid to play it. So a lot of times we will play it, we'll wait a little while before we do that. I don't walk right in and do that right away, even though I may have the evidence. Because the reason why is I actually want you to lie to me. I want the suspect to lie to me. Why? Why would I want you to lie to me? In court, it's really good in court, as I really truly believe, and again, it's just me, is most people do not like somebody that lies. So when you're up there and they watch a video, and they're going to watch the whole video, and it may be 2 or 3 hours when I'm sitting on the stand and we're playing the video, they're watching them lie, then they watch them take these baby steps, and then they watch them start getting more facts, and you watch them confess. They're really quick to be, jurors, I believe, are quicker to convict somebody versus, if I didn't let them lie. And so when I train and I talk to new detectives, allow them to lie, even if you know they're lying to you. And most of the time, I know right away if somebody's lying to me because I know a lot of the facts about the case. Sometimes I don't, but if I have a lot of factual information, the technology that's out there, I have to assume, like right now I'm being recorded. So most people really do assume anymore, especially in today's day and age, is we're being recorded at all times. Surveillance cameras, people having their phones on, whatever the situation may be. I just had mouth surgery about a week ago, so I apologize. They have to assume that they're being recorded at all times. So a lot of times we can use those techniques as well. So the baiting stuff that goes on in those interview rooms can be really, really important, is because I'm just trying to elicit a response from somebody as they're talking. And then one other technique that we use is we use what we call themes. When I'm talking about that, or a reason why, I've been to classes where they call it themes. I call it a reason why. Why did somebody commit a crime? If I'm interviewing somebody that committed a robbery during Christmas holiday season, what reason why would somebody do something like that? Financial. I did a little bit of background on that particular individual. They're a single father. They have 3 kids at home. It's the holiday season. Can I use that to my advantage to get somebody to confess to a robbery? Absolutely. It was a bank. You went in to rob a bank. They got a lot of money, and you're trying to provide for your children. I can use a lot of different themes about why or reasons why people actually committed different crimes. So a reason why, a motor vehicle theft, something, when I talk about, especially when I train our recruits, is, they're not going to necessarily interview suspects in homicides, but they may interview a suspect in a motor vehicle theft. What would be a reason why, in the wintertime, why somebody stole a car? They were cold, the guy just left in the driveway running, what did they expect? We have those all the time, almost on a daily basis. So those are really easy interviews to do. Burglaries, same thing, people next door, those people had a lot of stuff, you don't have a lot of stuff. There's a lot of different reasons why people may have committed a crime. So you got to sometimes do a little bit of homework on people and try to get as much background about them and learn about them as well. A lot of times we're going to try to make people feel comfortable in that interview. So a lot of times you'll see, and we'll actually play a couple of videos where people are sitting at a table. I don't like the table. Why do I not like the table in the interview? It's a barrier. I don't like the barrier. And the reason being is I've been to classes like, if you look up to the left, you pause for 2 seconds, you must be alive. That's not necessarily true. And a lot of times, even body language. If I sit like this, does that mean that I'm standoffish and I don't care or anything like that? Not necessarily. Much but I'm comfortable that way. Or I'm overweight and I just want to rest my arms on my stomach. Whatever the situation may be, But it doesn't necessarily mean that you're just closed off. So you want to make somebody feel comfortable. Can I make somebody feel uncomfortable very quickly? How do I do that? Close. If I get in this personal space right here, and I start talking to you, it's going to make you feel uncomfortable. So it's very easy to make people feel uncomfortable just by the proximity about how close you are to somebody and when you're talking to them. So if I start, can I cuss in an interview? Is it all right to cuss? If I walked in the room and said, listen, MF, let me tell you about what MF you did tonight and all that kind of stuff, would that go very well on a video? No, not at all. But if I go in and I'm interviewing a gang member and he's involved in a homicide, and every other word's like, well, you know, mother, blah, 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 and he's breaking it down. I'm like, no, I don't have to understand. And I'm going back and forth, and I have that dialogue. Is that okay to do? That's real life. That's the way sometimes these interviews go. If I'm interviewing a lieutenant colonel that murdered his wife, would I be dropping the F-bomb? Probably not, because again, the language and everything else is totally different. So as a detective, I have to change my personality all the time. One minute I may be interviewing a gang member, the next minute I may be interviewing a lieutenant colonel that murdered his wife. So I've got to be able to change my personality, or a doctor that might have been involved in a homicide or whatever. So that language is really, really important. I always tell detectives, if you don't understand what somebody said, ask them. I interviewed a doctor one time, and he's using words that I can't even pronounce, let alone spell. And I'm like, can you dummy it down for me a little bit? Because again, I don't have the education level you do. But again, being able to talk to people. I love gang cases because growing up down the southeast section of Colorado Springs, it made it much easier for me to relate to people. We went to the same schools, all those kind of things. So I was able to talk a lot to people that I could relate to a little bit better. But again, sometimes I may be interviewing a lawyer or a doctor that's involved in something very serious. If you have two people involved, two suspects, two bad guys, do you interview them together? No, always separate. Why separate? Their stories, so they can't talk about it. So if I walked in the room and you're my bad guy and I'm talking to you, and the first words out of your mouth is, "I want a lawyer," I'm done with you, and you're my other bad guy. How long do I wait before I go talk to you? Do I walk right in and start talking to you right away? If I'm getting paid overtime, actually, wait a little longer. Which drives my boss crazy. I'm going to make you sit there and think about it. Maybe for 1 hour, 2 hours, maybe even 2.5 hours. I'm done with him. He's just sitting there. He's already on his way to jail. And you're in the room going, holy crap. How much is my buddy in there talking about? What's he saying? Those kind of things. I'm playing mind games with you at this point. I'm making you believe that your buddy's in there talking. So the first things that I usually will say when I walk in the room, man, shut your friend up. But, I certainly want to talk to you as well, because your side of this is really important as well. So I'm giving you the perception your friend talked. In reality, he never talked. But you don't know that because you've been separated the entire time. So those are some of the things that we'll do is when we have multiple suspects involved. I love multiple suspect cases because they're easier for me, that I can actually use that as a leverage and a tool for me regarding that. Let's see, what else I want to talk a little bit about before we watch some of these. Any questions about how some of those things go? This is a class that is usually a 40-hour class. There's a lot of stuff that we give. Sometimes even 8 hours.
What are some reasons that an interview might last longer than 2 to 4 hours? Is it because you can't get the information you want from them, or other?
There's a lot of different things that sometimes make them last a little longer. Sometimes it's like pulling teeth, trying to get information out of people. And you have to be very patient. Am I a patient person? Who thinks I'm patient? I am not patient at all. I am very impatient. I want to get things done right now. I'm like, go, 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 go all the time. However, I have to learn in that interview room to be very patient. I was actually quiet in the interview room once for 45 seconds. That's a record for me. Because when I ask a question, you want to allow somebody to respond. So sometimes I will ask a question, hopefully they will respond. If they don't respond in less than 10 seconds, I got to ask another question and continue to go at them. So I have to condition myself when I go into that room going, patience, remember patience, dear, patient. And so when I'm in that room, I have to have a lot of patience because they can take a long time. And a lot of times, you're talking to somebody, you think you're going in the right direction, you have to change your game plan, you have to change and start going in a different direction. So sometimes it takes a little bit of finesse to try to figure out exactly how you're going to be able to get this person to actually talk to you. And then just talking about us as individuals, as detectives, when we go to that room, one, we have to show a little bit of a personality when we're talking to somebody. We also have to realize that sometimes we're not the right detective for that interview. I have some family members in Colorado Springs and people I've dealt with that hate my guts, but their families are continuing to be involved in violent crimes. Would I be the right detective to go in that interview room with that family member that my name is like bad news in their family? Would I be the right detective to do that interview? Now, my ego says yes, I'd be walking in that room, but I have to realize, oh, no, I'm not the right person for that. That family does not like me anymore, or whatever the situation may be. So you have to really think about those things. And then when you're in the room doing those interviews, do I want to be pulled out by my we have to really be able to check ourselves. And I'm going to show you some mistakes that I made, and you can see how I can sometimes be sarcastic. And that's not my personality, but I was losing my cool. I was upset. I wasn't handling things very well, and I should have looked deep inside and said, this is not your interview today. Today's not your day. Get out of the room and let somebody else come in here. And sometimes those things are difficult to do as well. Anytime we do an interview, an interrogation with a suspect, we usually have another detective watching. Most of the time it's for the fatigue factor, because we may miss something. I've watched videotaped interviews, and when I'm doing my report going, holy cow, I just missed that actually occurring on the video where he's actually confessing. And because I'm tired and I'm fatigued, I may miss something. I've had it happen to me once. I watched the detective the other day. He was watching. I was like, holy crap, right here he said this, this, and this. And he missed it because he was tired. And the detective that was watching was apparently asleep because he missed it as well. So, you know, it's really important that we always have a second set of eyes, especially when we're doing these high-profile cases. Any other questions about what we do before we watch a few videos?
On some of those more famous cases where you want to that last for years of investigation, interrogations, is it continually the same detective that will be doing those interviews, or do you switch off your time?
You know, that's a really good question. Do the same detectives stay with the case throughout the years? The answer to that probably is no. Being is that most people come into the homicide unit, it's a great line in a resume, that a lot of guys that come into our unit promote. So we've had people go all the way up as high as, my lieutenant is now our police chief years ago. He's now our chief, a phenomenal police chief that I have. So a lot of times people don't stay there very long, especially at the line level detectives. A lot of people over the years are now lieutenants, commanders, and stuff like that. So when they leave and they promote, guess what happens? You were in the unit back in 1996. You keep working on the case. So there's a couple of us. There's like 2 of us now that have been in the unit for over 15 years, and we're sort of the mainstay. But I'm getting ready to retire, so we're trying to bring those other detectives along. Because when I'm retired, first thing I do is I smash my cell phone. And I sort of just drop off the face of the earth. I'm telling my son who's going to be a CSPD officer, you contact your dad via email, and I choose to look at it. If you find me, good luck. Because I just want to move on. Because this is a very demanding job. I mean, a couple weeks ago, I worked 105 hours a week. So when I hear my grown children talk about their 29-hour work week, sometimes it stresses me out. You find another part-time job because you're not working now. Working back to school where you need to be, those kind of things. So again, it can be very taxing just from the standpoint of the amount of cases. And sometimes, like right now, our homicides this year are down. We're only at 18. Where last year at this point, we were just getting slammed. It was very busy for us. So you just never know what's going to go on and what kind of workload you're going to have in regards to those detectives. And again, we have new detectives that are always coming into our unit, so there's a lot of training that goes on, mentoring them, those kind of things. So I get an opportunity to do that, which is a great thing because it's nice to be able to pass that knowledge on. I'm not one of those power control freaks that say knowledge is power. I truly believe in giving everything that I have. So when I teach, I train, I give examples of different warrants and all kinds of stuff that I've done over the years to make their job easier. And because some of these cases can be very complex. We had a case here years ago where a student during CCS was murdered, and I worked that particular case. It went cold for several years, and then after 5 years, what we did is I wrote a wiretap affidavit. I went up on a wiretap. Is that difficult to do on a homicide case? Wiretaps are almost unheard of in homicide cases. They don't happen. I've done actually 3 or 4 wiretaps in my 20 years. But on this wiretap affidavit, it was really pretty cool because I had 3 people. There were 3 different suspects that were involved in that particular case. One suspect stayed in Colorado. One moved to Ohio. And one of them moved to Las Vegas, Nevada, where I had to go 3 times during this homicide case. It was horrible punishment. My coworkers hated my guts. That I had to go to Vegas 3 different times. But once we went up on this wiretap affidavit, I did a lot of homework. I went through a lot of cell phone records, stuff like that. But once we went up on the wiretap, the first place I went to was the weak link, and I went to Ohio. And then I found out the guy was married and he had kids. When I landed in Ohio, who do I go see first? Why do I go see his wife? That's what I would do. And and would I see the wife at home when he's with her or when she's at work? At work. So what I do is I show up at work, And I start talking to her about, did your husband ever tell you about what he did 5 years ago? I was involved in this homicide, and I'm laying it on thick and heavy. What's the first thing she does as soon as I leave? She calls him just like I thought it would happen. She called him and she interrogated him for me. I didn't know. Ladies, you know you'd be upset when you find out your husband and your new baby and all that. He's a suspect. He's about ready to be arrested in homicide. So she interrogates him. As soon as she's done interrogating him, what does he do? He calls his buddies. And it worked just like I thought it would. So then after I was done in Ohio, I went back to Las Vegas, Nevada. And when I got to Las Vegas, Nevada, do I see the suspect? Nope. I see his wife. I mean, it was his girlfriend. I saw his girlfriend, his parents, his coworkers, his neighbors. I talked to everybody but him because what I'm trying to do is just stir the pot so everybody will call and talk to him. So those are the kind of things that we're able to do on some of our major cases. How many detectives do you think it took to monitor? We were up on 7 phones. How many detectives do you think it took to monitor phones for 30 days? We were up on it for 30 days. It took 50. There's 50 detectives involved. We don't have 50 homicide detectives. So we had to pull resources from all of our other areas to get detectives to work midnight shifts, swing shift, and all that, to monitor all these different phone calls that were coming. And there was a lot of work going in that case, very, very complex case. And in the meantime, we had a police officer shot and killed in Colorado Springs at the same time. We're in that wiretap affidavit. So literally, I'm back in Colorado Springs. I just got back from Ohio. We had a homicide police officer, and he stopped almost everything. We're still up on the wire. We got to have people over there, resources there. But then all of a sudden, you're not alone with doing that. You got to jump back into this case and work on this homicide where a police officer's just been shot and killed. So there's a lot of things that go on in this case. Very demanding. A lot of people don't last very long because of the work and stuff like that. Not necessarily don't last very long as police officers, but again, this is a very difficult job as well because it's hard on your family. I've gone through a divorce of them. It's not easy to be in that particular unit. So it causes a lot of problems. You have to really remember, I was telling cops too, you have to remember to keep your families first. I mean, my son is that's going to be a police officer. I took him to see Ken Griffey Jr. up in Denver. Your dad's on call. We're going to go. We're going to try to watch Ken Griffey. Literally the first day of what happened. I got paged down. I was like, are you freaking kidding? It's a Sunday. I'm getting called out in the afternoon. I come back to Colorado Springs and tell my boss, oh, I'm a little lazy out. I'll be there short. But I cheated and went to Denver. I shouldn't be that far away, but it was a one-time occasion, and my kids missed out a lot. You get called out on Christmas. I've missed many Christmases over the years. And I even volunteer now when my kids are grown to cover for the younger kids that have kids because I know what a big impact it has on the family. I have to be in court here in about 30 minutes. Is there anything else? I'm going to have to cut it just a little bit short, and I apologize. But is there anything else that I can address on how we do those interviews? Again, this is a class that normally, when I teach it, it can be anywhere from 8 hours minimum up to 40-hour class. And there's a lot of videos that we show, there's a lot of instruction that we go through, and when we do a lot of role playing, and let actual officers come up and interview me, I'll be the bad guy. And one of the things that we always talk about too, during these interview interrogations, if I don't ask you a question, I don't get one. And answer them. So a lot of times cops and law enforcement are really hesitant to ask difficult questions of people. So I always tell them, if you want to know the answer to something, you don't ask it, you're not going to get it. They're not going to volunteer. People don't come into the police station, just have diarrhea of the mouth and start giving you information. You have to pull it and extract it from them by asking them a series of questions. And when you have a series of questions, it's like I talked about earlier, being a quarterback. You have to have a game plan. So when I'm asking one question, I'm already thinking about 5, 10, 15 questions ahead of time where I want this thing to go. So when I'm asking them, question 1, I already know what 3, 4, 5, and 6 are. And then sometimes the way they answer, I might have to immediately make a decision to go a different path. So again, you got to be thinking on your feet a lot. You got to be, doing it. And is anybody an expert at this? We're not. I mean, I'm not an expert by any stretch of the imagination. I've had an opportunity to do thousands of interviews, lots of interrogations, involved in a lot of homicides. But I'm a human being. I make mistakes. And I'd be the first one to admit it. I've learned from my own mistakes. But you just have to do it. You have to practice a lot. A lot of young officers and those in the room that want to be in law enforcement, Be the guy that raised your hand and go, pick me, coach, put me in, let me do it. That's how I learned. I went straight from patrol to homicide years ago, and I said, take me, I'm your guy. And I've been there ever since. But if you sit on your hands and you don't want to engage, you don't want to get involved, you're never going to go anywhere. And that's probably really, really true in law enforcement. You've got to be able to jump over bullies. Any other quick questions, unfortunately, before I have to take off? None? Zero? Question you always wanted to ask a cop?
Well, this is more about personally, but why do you like being a homicide detective?
Why? It's a challenge. I've had jobs before. I actually worked for the phone company before I became a cop, and I sat in front of this main frame with wires, and I just put wires on hooks. And I'm like, this is going to drive me crazy. It was like watching paint dry. I didn't like it, but my job, every day I go to work, it's different. So I had to never know what I'm going to be doing day to day, who I'm going to be talking to, where I'm going to be. Right now, I can't tell you how many times over the last 20 years being in homicide where I come and I'm like, I had a case not too long ago where they're like, we had a homicide, you need to go to Montrose now. Get over there to Delta, get on the Western Slopes. I'm like, oh, okay. So I get in the car and I start driving. I'm like, this is going to be a really long day. And 9 o'clock that night, I'm like, I'm not done yet. I got to spend the night. I got nothing but the clothes I came over here with. I got no toothbrush, none of that stuff. So you never know where you're going to be from moment to moment. And that's what I really enjoy about it. It's just a challenge. It's sort of like that, putting the pieces of the puzzle together. As a patrol cop, it was really cool because you got to respond, but then you're like, well, how did they ever find out who the bad guy was? Because you didn't know the other things that went on the back end. So that's why I like it, because I get to respond out of the patrol. I get to know things from the ground up, and then I get to see it all the way through the system. Where first responders only get to see the very beginning of it, first 30 minutes or so, but they don't get to see the interrogation. They don't get to see the stuff that goes on afterwards, like warrants. Most patrol officers, write very few warrants. On any particular case, I may do 30 to 50 search warrants for cell phone records, business records, bank records. I do all kinds of warrants to be able to put all those pieces of the puzzle together to get to the end resolution of the case. So that's what I like about it. That's why I say it all this time. Rather than have to supervise people and stuff like that, moving up and stuff like that, that adds a different headache. Mine has a lot of stress. There is a lot of stress. And where does the stress come from? Where does my stress come from in homicide investigations? The emotions. But what happened? I have a case where every Monday morning, who calls me? The victim's family. What's going on with my daughter's case? What's going on with my husband's case? What's going on with my son's case? It's open. It hasn't been solved. Is that pressure? Absolutely it is. And it's not that you don't, we all care, but you put a lot of pressure on yourself to try to solve those cases because the family members want some resolution, and I wouldn't want resolution. Do we solve all of our homicides? No, we do not. We solve about 85 to 90% here in Colorado Springs. That's way above the national average. The national average is about 60 to 65%. I read an article just out of curiosity because Chicago's in the news a lot about their high homicide rate. They're right now clearing about 10%. So out of the 600 plus ARR I had this year, only 100 of them have been solved. So you have 500 family members out there wanting some resolution of their case, and they deserve that. So as detectives, we want to give that to family members. We want them to know. And you put a lot of pressure on yourself, which sometimes can become overwhelming because I can't tell you how many times I woke up in the middle of the night going, wow, I should be doing this, I should be doing that. I can't get back to sleep because I'm thinking about what I got to do when I go to work, and being able to shut it off is really sometimes hard to do. That's why when I retire, I smash my phone and I just disappear off the face of the earth. Any other questions? You've been a great class. I do appreciate you guys coming today.